think we're going. Hello, and welcome to the Pixel Professor podcast, where we take an academic deep dive into the cultural and artistic phenomenon that is video games. It is May 6th, 2024, May the 6th be with you. I'm Iraq Tenor, and I'm joined by my very own mindful gamer,
Swift.
Yes, Darth Swift. I asked this because... Well, I have to ask you first. What did you? So we are 2 days out from May the 4th. Did you
Yes.
celebrate? What did you do to celebrate?
I watched the new Tales of the Empire.
Did you like it?
Yeah, I thought it was really good.
Yeah, me too.
I watched the first arc on Saturday to celebrate.
Yep.
And then finished the second arc yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Good stuff.
It's great stuff.
My local game stores had sales on all their Star Wars stuff.
Did you get any cool things?
I did. I got some Star Wars Legion miniatures.
Oh, sweet!
The buy one get one half off. That kind of thing is pretty handy. So we got some of that.
Need to learn how to play
What
this
did
game.
you do?
So I went to I wish I had looked further in advance before. The theater here at Disney Springs did like a marathon starting on May the 3rd, the night before, and had cool merch and stuff, and I didn't get to that. But they were showing the 25th anniversary showing episode 1. And so my wife and I went to Phantom Menace, and it was awesome. That's the one. Well, so I wasn't born for episode 4 yet. New Hope, I wasn't born yet. Empire Strikes Back, I would have only been a couple of years old, so I'm pretty sure I didn't see that one in the theaters. I saw them later in the theaters because of the special editions, which it's okay, controversial, right? But I do remember the first movie I have a memory of going to is going to the drive-in. I would say drive-through to watch Return of the Jedi.
Oh, cool.
And falling asleep in the backseat of our station wagon as a little kid. But so I hadn't seen, the only other one that I hadn't seen, the point of that story, was episode 1. I didn't see that one in the theaters. I've seen them all now in the theaters.
That's pretty cool.
Big moment. Yeah. It was really cool in the theaters. It was fun because I always heard the legend of when, and this is a spoiler alert if you haven't, in the last 25 years, if you haven't seen episode 1. So there's this moment when, the doors open and there's Darth Maul and he's got his lightsaber and he ignites the one side and then he ignites the other side. And I had always heard that in the theaters, no one really knew that was coming and everyone lost their minds. And I always wish that I had been able to experience that. Well, I don't know if everyone just knows that now, the legend of that. The theater really recreated that. As soon as he opened that second side, everybody just started screaming and cheering and it was so cool. So it's fun.
Oh, it's probably the most important holiday of the year.
In our house, it is. We made these little grilled cheese dipper things, but you make them. Basically, it was a ripoff recipe that we had from what is the Galactic Star Cruiser, that hotel that went under, unfortunately, because it was too expensive. But we made some of that and we ate. We were going to have blue milk. I think we might even do that today. We're trying to stretch this out as far as we can. So I watched that series, and then over the last 48 hours or so, I just kind of in the background, I've been watching, because of episode 1, I watched episode 2 and episode 3. My kids, actually, this is how you know you're raising your kids right. On May the 4th, my youngest, my 11-year-old, came downstairs and turned on Star Wars. She's like, it's May the 4th, we got to watch it. So she turned on episode 1 and was going to watch, I think she made it through all 3 of the first 3.
Whoa.
Which is pretty good for her. And we watched, so I watched that, and then I've been watching Obi-Wan, which I think gets a little bit of a bad rap. It's kind of fun. I do think there's some awkward moments, but watching it again, I'm like, this is pretty darn good. There's some really, really cool moments. There's some really, the problem is the bad moments are bad. They're really quite bad. I just watched the moment, where they go up to that laser gate, and he takes them out. He takes out the stormtroopers there, and then that lady comes in to sort of rescue him. And I'm at the moment where he and Leia are trying to figure out the code to get through the laser gate. And then he blasts it, the lasers go away, and they zoom back, and you could just walk around. There's tons of space to one side, the guard shack. It shows the side of that, and you could drive a car through that space basically. And it makes it a little less imposing. Like just
Yeah.
walk around. Like you got plenty of room there. No, you're not driving a car through there, so you can just walk around. Anyway,
Just walk around. You're fine.
stuff like that.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
anyway, it was a great show. But I'm glad to hear you celebrated May the 4th. Huge holiday, very important. As you can tell, I don't like Star Wars at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hate it.
You'll get there. You'll get into it someday.
I still genuinely. I went to Galaxy's Edge last night. I didn't want to go on May the 4th because it was a zoo. I wanted to go, but there was no way it was going to happen. So I went. Yeah, last night, and it was quite empty, which was not empty, but light for this time of year. And man, every time I go, there are people there who just know so much more than me about Star Wars, and I just feel like just such a baby, and I love it so much, and I'm just a baby. So anyway,
Well,
and then the second question: what are you playing? What are you any new additions to the games that you are playing? Are we just playing the same stuff still?
still playing the same stuff. I tried out a game that's coming out pretty soon in beta. Actually, it's already out. I think it's already out. V Rising.
Yeah, are we allowed to talk about that? Are we allowed to say things about it?
That's why I was being so slow about it, because I
Yeah.
think I mean, people know that it exists, and I think it's been out for a while, but we played like an early edition of the beta because it was in alpha, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, the spoiler is that there are vampires involved.
Yes. V, it is very big. You might not know what the V stands for. It could be vegetables rising. You never really
could
know.
be anything.
You never know.
5.
It's cool.
Could be 5.
too. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's a cool game.
Yeah, it's really, really fun.
You should go check it out.
If you're not.
But the thing that's fascinating to me in the video game world this week,
Tell me.
fascinating. And then I want to hear what you've been playing.
Okay, it's nothing new. I just Fallout 4. So go ahead.
Oh, Fallout 4. Those TV shows.
Yes,
I still haven't,
they got me.
I'm into that. I haven't finished it, but yes.
So good.
And then we need to play Fallout 76 because I still have never played any of the Fallout games.
Got it.
So, Helldivers. Helldivers
Yes.
2.
My gosh.
Oh, man.
My goodness gracious.
Last weekend just exploded.
So
People were
how are you
so
feeling
furious.
about it? So tell our listeners what happened, because this is something we should talk. We should have like an episode devoted to the history of this situation.
Yeah.
Because man. Anyway,
Sony's the distributor of the game. Arrowhead Studios is the game developer. Sony distributes the game.
Mhm.
At the very beginning, 8 years ago when they signed the contract, Arrowhead signed the contract with Sony. Then 6 months before it launches, Sony's like, oh, by the way, everybody's going to need to sign into Steam with their PlayStation account. They're going to need to link their PlayStation account to their Steam account in order to play this game.
right.
At that point, Arrowhead was like, we're 7.5 years into developing this. Like, we're not going to be like, nope, see ya. So whatever, they didn't. Then on day one, so many people wanted to play Helldivers
Huge
that they had
game.
to shut it. They had to their servers crashed.
Yeah.
So Arrowhead decided we're going to turn off that requirement. And so if you read through the fine print, you can see that maybe that there was a requirement for a link. But at the very beginning, they turned it off because they just didn't have the server capacity, and it was clogging things up. Then, over the weekend, Sony made them enforce the requirement. Sony set out this messaging that was like, starting on May 30th, you're going to have to link your PSN account to your Steam, blah, blah, blah. The Helldivers community did not take to this news kindly.
No.
They were furious.
Mhm.
And there's good reason in terms of like, why
Yeah.
make us do this? You know, Sony, you're making a boatload of money. Just like, can that just be enough?
No. Never.
Another problem is a bunch of countries in the world don't allow you to create a PSN account.
Yep.
That's kind of on Sony. Like that's not Arrowhead's fault. It's
Yeah.
not the user's fault. Some user in some country that can't create an account, they paid a lot of money for a game that now they can't play anymore.
Yeah.
So, and you interrupt me if I'm giving the summary.
This is great. This is because this is, yeah. Who to be angry at is my thing. Like, look,
Yeah.
ugh. Yeah.
Then over the weekend, people were furious. They went on to Helldivers 2 on Steam and review bombed it.
Yeah.
Changed their positive reviews to negative, added a bunch of new negative reviews, it went from overwhelmingly positive to overwhelmingly negative in the space of like 3 or 4 days.
I was gonna check
And
that.
then
Is that still the case?
no, it went back up today. But the thing, I don't know how far it's gone up, but and then they started doing it to
Mixed.
Helldivers.
It's mixed.
Yeah, well, that's two
Hey,
up from where they used to be,
right.
or 3 up, I guess.
Yeah.
So then they went back to the original game, the Helldivers game, which currently has like 1,000 people playing it at any given time. It's like a teeny tiny game. And they started review bombing that game. So this actually helped the CEO of Arrowhead in his talks with Sony to kind of like, he went and said, look, people are returning the game. They're getting refunds. They're review bombing us. Like, this is a big deal. You guys kind of messed this up. And he took some responsibility. He was like, look, I didn't communicate this very well. And like, you know, so he said, some of this is on me, but like, they're the ones making us do this. But also like, I probably could have communicated better and stuff like that. So this morning, Sony walked it back. They said, you don't have to do it.
The review I'm looking at right now says, have some liberties, Sony.
So,
and some less appropriate things. But yes. Yes. Yeah.
the two things I love about this are, one, it's the player standing up against the multinational behemoth, giant, rich corporation. And we won.
With the mixed in with the funny politics of the game,
Yes.
makes it so much richer. Like, it's just amazing. Like, everything that this game sort of pokes fun at comes to like this big swirling heap of whatever it became, and then ultimately, Sony, on the one hand, democracy wins. On the other hand, Sony knows they would lose from a capitalist perspective, right? If all those people left and then Anyway, it's such a fascinating story, and I feel like it kind of lumps in there with all the pay-to-play stuff and everything else. Like, there's this big stew of how do we make money in games, and how do gaming companies survive, and where these big bad gaming companies come into play, from Microsoft to to Sony and others. Just really, really fascinating. This story's been as we talked about last time, this game crashes on me all the time, and then I saw this happen, and then NVIDIA just sent out this driver update that I installed today, and I didn't know that everything, like, because I was ready to be like, well, Helldivers doesn't work for me anyway. Like, maybe this is a sign. I don't know. But I read in the specifics of the driver update that it addressed all caps Helldivers 2 crash issues in the new driver. So I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe I can finally play this game and it won't crash all the time. And democracy won. So maybe there's, I don't know, maybe some Helldivers 2 is in our future.
Oh,
I have to see.
It's got to be.
It's a great game.
I think it's fascinating because this is a game that, because it's a live service game, because it's kind of like a player PvE, player versus environment game, basically the game has trained this community to join forces to complete major orders.
Yes.
And we have to coordinate, we have to figure out, okay, we're going to attack this planet, we're going to defend this planet. And then it moved into the real world. So the major order, even though it wasn't a major order, but it was this community which you have built over the course of, 2 months.
Yeah.
And we've gotten pretty good at working together, and we've got hundreds of thousands of people who are into this. And then
really
we're
fun.
Just turning the fire hose over to
Sony. That was
Sony.
They became the big bad bugs that had to be squashed, and it worked.
It was a defense mission, and we won.
Well, and they don't always work, but this one did. That's crazy cool. Yeah.
You can go to Etsy now and type in orbital review bomb, and people are making patches it looks just like the Helldivers logo and the Helldivers like stratagem style.
Okay.
And it's got the PSN, like an arrow going down. It's like, it's amazing.
Cool. That's really cool.
And you're a veteran of Malevolent Creek, and you're a veteran of the Sony review bomb.
That's
the orbital review bomb.
That is so cool. Man. Well, good job.
Games are cool, man.
Yeah, they are cool. And the communities can be cool, too. You know, that's a decent little segue. Okay, so today's topic that I'm really, really pumped about, and I already know Well, I don't already know this, but I'm pretty sure this is going to turn into a two-parter as well. That might get because
Oh,
there's just
yes.
so much cool stuff. Speaking of humans, doing cool things, because to me that's sort of the theme of today's episode is that humans can do cool things, and these are the cool things that they can do. So let
Oh,
me start
yes.
this. All right, today's topic. And of course, I already come at this with a love of music as my degree field, and I've also always loved audio design and such. I made that part of my undergraduate studies, and so I've been fascinated by audio technology and how that intersects with the creation of video games and music and soundtracks and all that kind of stuff. And I understood a lot of this sort of conceptually, or at least big picture wise, in terms of how things progressed, just having lived through the progression and having had some of these experiences myself. But this, I tell you what, I am barely scratching the surface in this presentation. It's going to be a survey. Um, the sort of the overarching principle is just, I think we talked a little bit about this last time, or maybe a couple of weeks ago. Artists and technology, like artists depend upon technology, right? First, painters needed different pigments to paint. Composers are always up against like what instruments are available and how to push those. And we live in this era that's so easy to take for granted in terms of how many artistic boundaries have been met and then pushed to their limits and then broken in such a short amount of time. Like the violins existed for how many hundreds of years? We broke that barrier a long time ago, and we still use it because it's still a gorgeous instrument. Put into context, what artists can do in video games now versus what they could do 30, 40 years ago is just light years separated. And yet, what artists were doing within those limitations, it's just stunning to me. Like humans, when they put their creative minds to a thing, will not be held back. And I think that is a huge part of this presentation today on this sort of survey history of video game music. There's so much to be presented here. There's so many pieces to be put together. If there's one common theme in all the research that I did, it's that the timeline is a little screwy sometimes. Like people obviously didn't know that they were innovating in such great ways. So they didn't know that I should write this down when this happened and when I invented this and when they just were doing the thing. And so like piecing this together has been really interesting. So I'll be curious if anyone listening has any corrections or updates to any of these concepts. I'm not an engineer, and a lot of this stuff was done by a really brilliant mind. So I'm going to do my best to break it down. And I'm already sure that I'm going to get some things wrong. I'm going to try not to move too quickly through some of the technical stuff, but just know that it's being described from the perspective of someone who's trying to understand it at the most sort of elementary level and try to communicate it that way. So oversimplification is always dangerous. It can lead you to understand something, but you never really know if you've got the whole picture. So I'm going to do my best today. And I'm so excited because I already love this. All the like little cultures and groups that have sprung up that love early video game creation, and what they're doing today needs a shout out and its own episode and interviews with the people doing some of these projects that are preserving some of these old technologies, because you can't really imitate them through emulation, like emulation software and stuff. You really need the hardware itself. So anyway, this stuff is fascinating. So at different spots as we go, my objective here is to teach a few concepts and terms. We'll discuss some of those. We'll review. Please, again, stop me if I get too technical. I'd rather this episode, well, we have to do it in a few tries than move too quickly, because ultimately for me, the goal is, well, to feel some nostalgia about games that we grew up playing, but also to just really appreciate what you're experiencing in a video game, what you're experiencing in a video game that is unique to that environment, and have an appreciation for where that's come and where that's come from. So we're going to discuss principles and then again review and come back and circle around. And I'm probably going to talk too fast, so I apologize if I do, because again, of the episodes that we've done so far, this has just been a really, really fun journey. So a couple initial concepts that we have to get into our brains are the sort of natural elements that have to come together to make video game and video game audio possible. So that's going to be electricity and waves. And I'll give you the elementary definition of both those things. We're going to talk a little bit about bits and binary, the sort of basic language, of the basic digital language, and then a few kinds of waves. And this has been the part that's so fun. Like how different waves can be manipulated to become a guitar or a harpsichord or just an electronic sound that sounds cool or the sound of Mario's fireball or like it's all electricity. And let's go to that first. The key invention of all of this, of us having a podcast, of us talking about video games, the key invention, and I'm watching this series on Apple TV called Franklin. Man, it's so funny that he's credited early on as being the person who invented electricity. And of course he didn't invent electricity, it's existed. But anyway, his the key and lightning, and actually lightning rod wise, he did do that, right? And saved a lot of lives actually by installing lightning rods on places like bell towers on churches. And it was quite revered Western world wide for his quote unquote invention of electricity. But there is no video. There's no video game. Games exist without electricity. Video games do not. Electricity is the key component to create video, right? And
I thought you were going to say there's no video of Benjamin Franklin flying the kite. And I was like, yeah, that's a good point.
I guess we don't really know. He did invent I've never seen one, but who am I to say? But it's conspiracy. The world, you heard it here today on Pixel Professor podcast. That video is out there, everyone. We got to find it. The government doesn't want you to see it.
Landed on the moon.
Whoa. On the kite.
There's video proof.
Video proof. It's out there. Guys, we got to find it.
Electricity.
Electricity, key things. It can be on or it can be off. And it can be a certain wattage and intensities or what? Well, slow down. Slow. Whoa. Like you can turn a light on and off. I don't know if you know this. On or off. Yeah, on or off. That's kind of the two states that it exists in. You can change wattage. You can change like the way electricity behaves like a wave, and you can change the qualities of that wave. We'll talk more about that in a second. But that's the main thing. Electricity, key invention, on or off. Remember that. The other key sort of natural thing here that is just, I love the concept of waves. It was the one thing in physical science that waving is, and see how nice that felt to do that?
Yeah.
So there's one thing. When you wave at someone, it just feels good. When you go to Disney and everyone just kind of spontaneously waves at each other. Like we don't do that very often, and it just feels good. I was sitting there at Disney Springs, and this guy was driving this boat-looking car thing, and he waved at everybody. And I instantly was like, I just feel better. Anyway, so waves make you feel better.
Okay.
So waves, sound itself is the one analog acoustic element of video games, right? It's the one thing that has to find its way into the air, right? Travel through air particles in this acoustic analog fashion to my eardrums, and then my eardrums will interpret the sound as being whatever my brain decides it is, whether it's Swift's voice or again Mario's fireball or the sound of bugs and Helldivers or whatever else, like, or the sound of a violin or the sound of a musical instrument. Like my ear takes that sound, that information, even from my headphone to my ears. There's still a speaker. There's still sound that travels through the air between the speaker to my ears, and provides that sort of stimulation for my eardrums that then, provides all that information to my brain. It has to leave the computer, which is simultaneously one of the coolest things about it and one of the hardest things about it. Like lots of things can go wrong in the air between the speaker and your ear. Lots of things, and it all depends on a variety of technologies. So we talked about this a little bit before in one of our other episodes. One of the hardest things about being a creator in this environment, really in any environment, but where you have to like give the thing you've created to someone else and then have them give it to someone else, is you just never know. And we're going to talk about how important that is. How important it is, like to have some kind of quality control. Like you've got, like as a creator, say I create this amazing score, and all of it is sort of disrupted by the fact that the sound card that you have in your computer is bad, or the speakers that you have are bad. Right? There's so many different things that can come together. Just there's an alarm going on. Can you hear Alexa in the background here?
The sound waves.
Yeah, the sound waves. Alexa,
they're hitting my ears.
Stop. See? That's actually really timely, right? I feel like I have to leave that in because that's like Like
It's true.
sound quality, those little Alexas are a great example of the way speaker technology is developed. Those things can pack a punch,
Yeah.
right? Early days, not so much of electronics.
Alexa
Anyway,
was a
so
lot less high tech back then.
that's true. So
Yeah.
anyway, this wave aspect is really, really crucial. And that's where all of the manipulation happens, both at the source and as it's traveling through the air, right? I can change the speed or the frequency of a wave, and we won't talk about all the science of what frequency means, but just basically the higher the frequency, the higher the pitch. You change the shape of the wave and the distance between each peak and valley and such. And I'm not using all the technical terms, but just in terms of the shape of the wave, the more I change it, the more the sound itself changes. And different voices, different instruments all have a unique signature, some of which we can sort of recreate and some of which we can't. Make sense so far?
Makes sense.
Okay, so these are the two principles in nature, electricity and waves. Okay, in the computer itself, really basically, we've all heard the terminology of bits, right? A bit, like 16-bit, 8-bit. What does that mean? A bit is simply a single unit of digital information. That's how we package it. And it really exists in one state or the other, on or off.
That reminds me of electricity.
Hey, as it should. Huh? Good job. So electricity connections, we're making them like electricity as well, right? So either on or off is how electricity can switch a switch on, and all those different electrical signals go through whatever that chip's job is, and it either switches a certain, whether or not it's like a series of 8 of those bits, and a certain combination of ones and zeros in one setting will say, this is a letter C. When I push that button on my keyboard, it goes through my computer and then the computer interprets a series of ones and zeros and shows on my monitor a letter C. Or this is the note E flat to be played by the MIDI instrument blank, right? And so like depending on the coding language that I'm using, I'm telling the computer to interpret my language and then interpret it into its own language of ones and zeros. Make sense?
Cool. Yep.
So, okay.
Makes sense.
Then, so here's the connection of all of that, those first two elements into the element that's going to be most important for us in the beginning here. So these are different kinds of wave types. Don't worry about this too much for now. A sine wave is the most basic kind of wave. We're going to show you an example of one here in a minute. You'll notice something about the square wave, and I'll point that out more clearly in a second, just in terms of how it's shaped, the sort of rectangular, or as you might say, square wave. Different kinds of waves. Sine waves, square waves, triangle waves, sawtooth waves. These are all going to be important in a second. They all, in a sound perspective, all of these waves sound different. That's the important thing to remember right now, is from a creation perspective, you want to be able to manipulate these wave shapes in different ways. And as you can see, when you combine the concept of a wave with binary, like if you're listening, if you can imagine the shape of a wave, and then you take that shape and you imagine it with jagged edges where it's up and down like squares. In binary, I can have it say 1, as in on, and the wave goes up and it forms a simple square. And then 0 means the wave goes away. So it's basically turning that wave on and off. And the longer I have, the more ones I have in a row, the longer that wave is on. And the more zeros I have in a row, the longer that wave is off. Make sense?
Makes sense.
1 equals on, 0 equals off, 1 equals waving. 0 equals wave not waving. And by using those different combinations of ones and zeros, having it on or off, longer or shorter, changes several different things, from the timbre of the wave to the frequency of the wave, etc., etc., etc. Okay? All right, so those are the main principles. And we're going to review each one of those things. So here's what I wanted to show you first. I'm so glad I came across this video, because Wendy Carlos can explain this so much better than I can. Wendy Carlos was sort of an academic and a musician. My early exposure to electronic music was in college, and a lot of the early electronic music, maybe you can imagine it in sort of like these futuristic 60s and 70s films, like Clockwork Orange or something like that. Like it's kind of out there, and the music's kind of avant-garde, atonal kind of stuff. So a lot of the early exploration with this kind of music was not terribly accessible. And then later, as we go through time, it turns into really accessible music, especially like with Chariots of Fire. You know, I'm sure you've heard that music before, and if you haven't, you need to go do some homework. But it's really fun. But this device that Wendy Carlos, this early composer, is standing in front of is called the Moog. The Moog is invented by a guy whose last name was Moog, and his synthesizer has lovingly been now referred to as massive cabinet as the Moog. And what Wendy Carlos here is going to show you is how a musician uses electricity to build musical sounds. And we're going to see examples of all the waves that I just showed you and one or two more that are going to be really important to us as we move our journey forward. And so, again, waves, think waves equal instruments. Okay, so here's Wendy Carlos and the Moog. I should click on the right place.
Let me try and show you how we get some of these sounds. First of all, none of them exist as a particular sound as they would on an electronic organ. There's no magic button marked trumpet or violin or drums. You have to build every sound. And to start to build these sounds, you have to start with something pretty simple. And here are the simple things we start with. There are 5 of them. The simplest one of all is something that any lab technician must have seen at one time or another. It's called a sine wave. It's very smooth, very flute-like. A little bit.
And for those listening, I just describing a little bit of what you're seeing. It's Wendy Carlos, this composer back in the 70s from a BBC documentary, standing in front of this massive cabinet. And just so you know as well, you'll notice it looks really intimidating at first. It's like when you're standing in front of a recording console, if you've ever seen one of those, and it's just got row upon row upon row upon row of like knobs and dials. This is similar to that, standing upright. The thing to know, though, is once you've figured out what one of those rows is, you've basically learned the entire recording console. That's oversimplified. There are different parts of it that have different jobs, but basically each one, and this is somewhat similar. Like most of these rows are just different waves or different oscillations or oscillators that are going to be like plugged in to either into a filter or into a speaker, all through this keyboard where she's going to be able to push a keyboard. It's going to go through that channel, and then it's going to have whatever quality she's turned that knob to. So she's got different channels set to different kinds of waves, if that makes sense. She can probably explain it better than I can. But so what she's doing is unplugging one output and plugging it into another channel as she goes through here across the board.
Okay.
And I back up just a little bit. So you heard the sine wave, the most basic waves. Sounds kind of like just a basic hum. It's the purest form of sound, like the purest electronic sound with no manipulation.
A little bit more complicated wave is called sawtooth. And it's called sawtooth because on an oscilloscope screen, it looks just like a sawtooth. And this one is a little richer, a little readier, and it resembles a lot of sounds found on home electronic organs. Something in between those last two, and a very useful sound indeed, is something called triangular, and it's kind of a pointed sine wave. So you can see it's a little brighter than a sine wave. This one's called pulse wave, and I'm just going to show you how it swings into a thing called square wave. It's up, down, just like a switch. If you flip a switch, you're making a pulse wave. If it's an even off, on, then it looks on an oscilloscope very symmetrical, and it's called a square wave.
Here's the square wave. This one's really important.
And if I take the time that it's on and make it different from the time that it's off, it changes quality. Listen to it. Shifts interior. It's a very useful sound.
Very useful.
The last of which is probably the least useful, although you'd never want to be without it. It's very colorful, very coloristic. In its pure form, it sounds like surf or a steam sound. It's called white noise.
Sure, useful in video games.
Now I'll patch this up here into one of my output modules and try and show you how with these primitive sounds we start to get some very musical sounding things. First of all, here's a sawtooth wave that's coming out of an oscillator, going into a mixer, coming up into what's called a filter, which is going to remove parts of the sound, either the top or the bottom part, much like bass and treble controls do on your, high fidelity system. And by hitting a note on the keyboard now, I'm connected up, so I'll hear that one sound. It's a very low sound. It's very bright. if I manually turn this knob, you'll listen to the sound get considerably duller.
And I think I'm going to stop it there. This video is in the show notes. It's so cool. Watch the whole thing. She actually takes that sound and she takes a classical piece and recreates it using, basically you would go through and set all these channels to these presets and then record them into a recording device with one preset and then go back and do another, and you stack onto it, and basically you created a whole electronic orchestra out of these different sounds. And a lot of different composers were doing that back in the 60s and 70s. That ability, especially with the sawtooth, or excuse me, with the square wave, where she changed the distance, that if you notice, the shape of it changed from square to like a taller rectangle to a wider rectangle, and how it adapted and changed. That is what composers are going to do to change the timbre of the wave to resemble, say, a trumpet, or to resemble a tuba, or to resemble a guitar. Or all they do is sort of change the shape and scope of those waves to approximate different sounds, or sound effects as well. This is their main, creative tool, right? This is their resource. Electricity is their resource, and this is how you can manipulate the electricity that's going through your computer, through your card, through your CPU, and then manipulate it to make music. Any thoughts or questions about this so far? Any questions about the Moog?
Awesome name. No, that's interesting.
So
That
cool.
makes sense.
Yeah. Well, do you know who this guy is? Standing in front of the Moog?
Oh yeah, that's Mr. Moog.
That's not Mr. Moog. I wish it was that.
John Williams?
We should call him. Nope, not John Williams. You're warmer though.
Hans Zimmer.
Hans Zimmer. That is Hans Zimmer standing in front of the Moog.
First try.
First try. He still uses his Moog. It's his favorite instrument. So when you go and watch Dune, and you hear those, they crafted a lot of acoustic instruments for Dune, but some of those really crazy, like bottomed out electronic sounds are made on that same device that Wendy Carlos was using. His has been updated.
That's
He's
wild.
patched his into his computer, so his keyboard on his computer, a lot of the old plugging in and like replugging in and to different filters and stuff. He's automated a lot of that stuff, but it's still just a plain old Moog. And it's an incredible instrument. And to be honest, maybe even an underrated instrument. I think the stuff you can do with this thing is just amazing. And the physics and the ideas that go into this Moog that was invented in 1964 are the same that video game composers used to do their thing. So let's talk a little bit about that. I won't read through this whole timeline. And again, as we go through here, I can already tell we're going to have to probably split this up because there's so much to say. But really, notice we don't even really get to 2000. We will with one of the games that we listened to. This is the 30-year period or so when all of this happens. And the amount of progress that we make in that short amount of time and how it's impacted our entire life. We're gonna touch on that a little bit. This, even though the creation and the pushing of boundaries and the initial play of this is happening in the video game world, especially how it moves into the music world and then just in general into toys and into, this is everywhere, and it's still everywhere. This is the period of discovery. This period from about 1964, I'm going to say, until about 1996. After that, it's just doing what we've already been doing faster and better, but it's really the same stuff. Dolby might have something to say about that, but that's my take on it so far. I do have a special thanks. The Pixelated Audio podcast is one that, if you are interested in video game audio, you need to listen to. These guys, a lot of this timeline was pieced together on a presentation that they did for the Library of Congress on video games. I tweaked some of it and added some of my own things and maybe disagreed a little bit here and there, but not much. And they're the real experts anyway, so I don't even feel like I have the ability to disagree with them. Please listen to their podcast. It's still an active podcast. They interview a lot of the creators that were involved in this process and focus in on certain video games that have particularly interesting audio or moved the art forward. It's just a really great podcast. So special thanks to them. And we're going to start here in the late 70s with system sounds and sound generators. But I wanted to start. So initially, the only sounds your arcade machine could really make, or that your computer could make, were like beeps and boops that were just coming from system sounds. Right? I don't know if your computer still does it. I don't think mine does it anymore. But when you turn it on, it used to you could hear from the inside of the computer a beep that was on the like motherboard itself. And like if it beeped a certain number of times, that was a warning that maybe the memory wasn't set in there right or whatever. So this is already where I feel like, goodness gracious, humans are cool. Like a human said, hey, there are sounds there. I can organize those sounds into sound effects or into music. Now, the problem is your CPU is already using electricity to run the game or run other stuff. So I can't use all of the electricity towards sound or it won't be able to do anything else. But if I can find any leftover electricity anywhere, I'm going to send it towards that system beep or boop and have that make a sound synchronized with what's happening on the screen. Like that thing already just blows my mind, and it's so cool. And it happened initially. Pong wasn't the first game to do this, but we're gonna say that because it's the first game to really do it successfully, where the beeps and boops are particularly well timed with this. Have you ever played Pong, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Like on the original, have you ever played it with the paddle, like with the whole paddle remote thing?
I don't think I have. No.
I remember as a kid, I can't remember who had it. Somebody in our family had an Atari with the paddles where you would rotate the paddles and it would make the little bar go up and down. And again, I'm going to play you just a little bit of some Pong gameplay, and you're going to hear it's really just 2 or 3 little sound effects that go off when the little ball goes either like on the screen or off of it. These are just system sounds.
I don't hear anything.
I don't either. There we go. You hear that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So every time it bounces and goes off the screen, when it goes off the screen, you get that nope sound. And when it hits the paddle, you get that very pleasing dink. Or when it bounces off the wall. Nope. Really, really simple. We talked last time about like in terms of analyzing a game and analyzing even Skyrim, this is still giving you feedback, right? This is you using a control, and then the game, one of the key ways it gives you feedback is through a couple tiny little system sounds. It's really elegant and it's really simple, and this game was ridiculously popular because of its simplicity and its novelty, I'm sure. But that's really just system sounds. Okay, that's just cool. Those are the boops and beeps that the computer is going to make just to do a variety of things. Then 1978, huge. Not the first game to do this, but really the first game to do something quite the way this does, the Space Invaders in 1978. So Space Invaders was a massive hit in arcades. Did you ever play the actual like original Space Invaders game?
I don't think I did.
It stressed me out too much. I played it, and we're going to talk about why. It's really just the sound. Like this game was very, very stressful. This one actually uses a dedicated chip, a Texas Instrument chip that was just a noise generator. It wasn't designed for music. It was designed to do other things, right? And so the designer himself, Tomohiro Nishikado, took those sounds, these noises, and actually creates. First of all, you'll hear the sound effects of when the lasers are shooting and when the aliens explode and stuff like that. And then, like when there's a little explosion, all just noises. You remember that wave that Wendy Carlos showed that was just that buzzy noise sound? That.
Yeah.
Think that mostly. We'll use that as the analog for this. But he also creates this little 4-note melody that plays underneath it. You can barely tell that it's music. But not only does it play that just over and over and over again, the trick that he uses is that as the Space Invaders go row by row and they're dropping down closer and closer to you and you get more and more stressed out, the sound effects and the music speed up. So there's this interactive element to it. And technically there was no real end to this game. So you could get to a certain level where it was going so fast and you were so, I don't know how people, anyway, it's worth just like discovering and watching more about Space Invaders and the crazy people who were set to play it as far as they could and break it, basically. It's crazy. That's
amazing.
Yeah, so here's Space Invaders. And I tried to give credit in every case to the YouTube channel that these came from. So please support these creators. You're going to find lots of people who do really good work with their playthroughs, and it's worth supporting them on their channels. They have really high quality audio and visuals as well, which helps me greatly, and I'm grateful for them. So here's Space Invaders. Hear that music? Ding, ding, ding. Faster and faster. Anyway, you get the idea. It gets worse. So very, very, very simple sounds. Again, huge hit. Simplest of music ever, but this leaves us very quickly. And I should say, the chip on there, I already mentioned it. This Texas Instrument is just a programmable sound generator, right? These quickly level up. They get more and more powerful, especially when we start being able to use more than just noise. This chip here, this AY38910, and its variants are the ones that become extremely popular in arcades, where you have that white noise channel that we saw with Wendy Carlos, which is really just noise that you can program into sound like different things, which is usually used, we'll talk about this more as we go, like for things like percussion. And then you've got 3 square wave voices. Basically, they're like oscillators of electronic waves, right? And once you have a square wave, remember, you can manipulate that wave to sound like a lot of different things. Very simple, only really that one kind of wave. Well, I guess you could say 2 kind of waves, the white noise one and then the square wave for music. And then you can do some really, really cool things. Rally X, for example, with music by Toshio Kai, is widely recognized as the first game to have continuous, genuinely considered music going in the background. And using that setup we talked about in terms of programmable sound generators. And this one's particularly fun. Again, you get into the world of these guys who are real aficionados with this music, and they can talk circles around me. I mean, there's just a whole world out there of people creating amazing things, still creating amazing things with this hardware and this software. So I want to play a little. Did you ever play Rally X? By the way, I don't think I did either. But you'll hear some sound effects. And this is the other thing, when you only have this one sort of sound generator, if you do decide to have sound effects, the music, at least on one of those voices, has to stop to make room for the sound effect to happen and then come back. And so that interactivity is also something that's tricky to program in. So here's some Rally X from 1980. Notice how the sound changes when the car changes direction, when it's going up and down versus left to right. So when he goes left to right, it kind of moves down and moves back up, so it's like kind of giving this engine changing sound. And then you got when he runs over the flags, feedback. It's all feedback and controls. See that change in sound when the car changes direction. Simple top-down graphics. Fun little addicting arcade game. Genuinely still fun.
That's awesome.
Rally X from Namco. So continuous gameplay is now a thing, but we're still using these really simple programmable sound generators. Now a huge leap forward. This chip, this SID chip, is amazing. And the world out there that is still there's this whole society of people that are taking every game soundtrack ever written for the SID chip and preserving it. You can download them all and play them on a special emulating player. It doesn't give you quite the same sounds, but this is incredible. Did you ever play the Commodore 64, that computer?
I don't think I did.
See, I thought that everyone had, and then I just came to realize in researching for this presentation, the Commodore 64 was mostly sold in Europe. It was huge in Europe, and I grew up in Europe. So my friends who had, I never had one, but I had several friends who did, and I loved the games on that thing. It was the first computer that it seemed like the computer in my home, the IBM that we always had, was Not it was a work computer. It was for like spreadsheets and whatever else that computer did. But Commodore 64's word, the only thing I ever saw anyone do on a Commodore 64 was games. So I don't know if that's what its main purpose was, but that's certainly what everyone I knew who used it for. But one of the things that the Commodore 64 had in it was this SID chip, the Sound Interface Device chip by Bob Yanis. He's the one who, and I hope I'm saying his name right. You can correct me out there if I'm not, because he deserves a ton of credit for creating this chip. Now, this chip is particularly interesting, and when we review, there's some things about this chip that make it particularly powerful. It only has 3 voices, but each one of those 3 voices aren't limited to just one kind of wave. They can produce 4 different kinds of waves. Normally what you would do is you just have one voice, one wave. It's usually a square wave that you can mess around with. This one, even though you would set the wave to be one thing, usually for a complete song or track, you could change it. And in the if this is one of those chips where early days, it's not doing a ton that's particularly different or creative. And then when people start to figure out they can change the instrument on the fly, automated wise, it's the stuff they start to make with this chip is really, even those 3 voices, the stuff they make with this thing is incredible. So I wanted to give a few examples. This one, music-wise, is one of my favorites. It's a game called Mule in 1983 by EA. It's this futuristic, like, you land on a planet, you and 3 other players. There can be computer players or whatever else, and your job is to, like, create a functioning, thriving society. It's really kind of a fascinating game. The mechanics are pretty tricky. A lot of it's sort of randomized and can go very wrong very fast, or very right very fast. But I wanted to give you a little sample of the music here. How, again, it's the same device being used for music and sound effects, and the music here, the music by Roy Glover, is really, really fun. And we're going to see it in action later in terms of how it was created in separate voices. But here's an example of Mule, 1983. You're about to land on the planet Errata. Oh, you know what? Let me go back just a little bit. I want you to hear the music before that. It was supposed to start sooner. Here we go. So you're choosing your race here. And different races, different alien races have different bonuses. Humans were particularly rough to play as, because they started with less money. The Mechtrons were the best, as you can see there. He's playing against 3 Mechtrons, so he's in trouble, this human player, playing against 3 Mechtrons. There's this ship flying overhead, dropping you off. Now he's taking off. Anyway, the sound, there's lots of space in between these, but the music in this game is ridiculously catchy. The way the sound effects interact with the game it's just so cool. And there's only 3 voices. Just can't get over it. Anyway, it's just so cool.
That's impressive.
Right?
It really is.
And then again, the music, the soundtrack to this game is really, really, really fun. Another game I loved this game. This is purely for me. So Sid Meier he made this game for the Commodore 64. He makes it again. Did you ever play when was that? It's probably like 20 years ago or more that he made the updated version for PC. And I loved that Pirates game. But I started in 87 with this version of Pirates. So I just, when I found this one, this is purely just for me. There are more interesting things, more interesting games. What is fun about this one, though, is Sid Meier programmed like Handel and Bach and other composers into the Sid chip himself. And this is pure nostalgia. I played this game for hours with my friends. So you're going to see how they use the Sid electronic sounds for a little sword fight. It's like an automated sword fight that basically was determined by the strength that you had versus the strength of the ships that you were trying to attack. And then you get a little bit of that classical music after you've defeated the rival ship here. So here's your sound effects. That's sword swooshing and stabbing.
Yes.
Oh, is he going to win? See the guys on the left, his numbers go down. Oh, he's panicked.
Oh, yeah.
And you're legendary. Oh, and it's a fort. You're attacking a fort, not a ship.
Oh.
And then, success, which means... You did it. You did it, obviously. And again, Sid Meier programmed that in himself. It reminds me, I think I told you this. I programmed a game, like a Star Wars game, with friends of mine in high school using BASIC. And I wanted a little, like, a scrolling screen in the beginning, like a Star Wars scrolling screen. And I sat there with my MIDI book out and the basic programming language and figuring out how to time it out. And I programmed note by note the entire main theme of Star Wars out. I wish I could find that disc. I wouldn't have anywhere to use it, but
wow,
it was really, really fun.
Wow.
So Sid chip is huge, massive. Okay, 1983 FM synthesis. This is one of my favorite. I just get so excited. This is so fun. The Sid chip's so cool. And so the FM synthesis isn't necessarily a purely video game. It's not a purely video game technology, but this, if you like 80s music, you owe it all to FM synthesis, where basically, man, the easiest way I know how to describe FM synthesis is you're basically taking two or more oscillating waves, and they call them operators. And I've watched a few YouTube videos on this, and boy, these people doing this are not just musically smart. They're also, just from a physics perspective, their understanding of the world far surpasses my own, and I'm in awe of these people. So they take multiple operators, and so think of it this way. This is the analogy that worked for me was when you think of, like, if you start, like, you drop a pebble in a pond, and you watch the waves coming out from that pebble, and then you drop another one near it. When those two waves hit each other, it changes the character of the waves. Right? Like, they come together and either a new wave forms, or depending on the speed of one versus the speed of the other, they change shape, they interact differently. Right? It's like when two waves converge on, and like because a rock formation is jutting out into the ocean or something like that. This is an electronic equivalent of that. You're taking two different waves, and when you put sound waves together, it changes the harmonics, it changes the signature of the waves, and it changes the sounds of them. So what they realized, if you messed around with any particular algorithm that changed the way those operators and oscillating waves communicated with one another, you could create just about any instrument or something that would approximate it. And one of the first places this happens is in this really famous DX7 keyboard that and all those little dots and things on the top are different operators and stuff that you can play with to create these different sounds. And then you also have these different presets, and the presets were what became super famous. One of which, the Bass 1 preset, might have been the most popular and the most famous. And like, the list of songs that use this Bass 1 preset is huge, but this one might be my favorite. You're going to hear it in the very beginning. That very first sound is the Bass 1 preset from the DX7 keyboard. This one. I won't play very much of it because I'm pretty sure we can't, but just a little bit of this first sound. One preset. That's it. That's the DX7 Bass 1 preset.
Interesting.
So that concept, so this chip right here, the YM2151, has all of those presets programmed into it. It's basically a synthesizer. And this YM2151 chip and its own ones, like its variants, end up everywhere. Arcade machines, toys, in the Sega Genesis, everywhere. And composers now can do almost anything that they want. They have 8 channels now instead of 3 or 4. And each one of those 8 channels has 4 of these operators on it. So you can take those 4 operators in any combination of how they're going to send their waves together and create almost an infinite, maybe an infinite number of sounds out of those simple operators. So sound effects and musical instruments, both ones created and ones you want to invent. Possibilities are endless in terms of what you can do with this YM2151 chip. One of the arcade games that uses that chip in 1984 is the Marble Madness game. Did you ever play Marble Madness?
I don't think I did.
This one's a lot of fun. Like it's a simulated 3D environment, and you control this little marble, and you need to keep it from like falling off the edges and dodging obstacles to get to a goal. It's like this little maze that it goes through. But just listen to the leap forward in sound that is the YM2151. This just blows my mind. Already a bell.
Yeah.
And here's your first level. Easy level. So that was the goal sound. And then the music changes for the next level.
They're filling marbles.
Yes. And little green jumpy things that are trying to keep you from making it to your goal or knock you off the edge.
Yeah, that audio is way different.
See, it almost sounds like, I mean, it's clearly electronic, but it's got a real brassy tone to it.
Yeah.
The sound effects are much more developed. Anyway.
Wow.
There's a richness to that sound, and again, the ability to create just about any instrument possible with just a simple like manipulation. Not simple, with the really complex arrangement of those 4 operators. And in most cases, again, the work had been done for you. You could set it to a preset. But if you were a really creative composer and was like, that sounds not quite right, you could sit there with those operators and just play with how they were connecting to one another and create new algorithms and new sounds, completely unique things. And that has not, I can't even imagine that's been fully explored. Like, it's there are still people playing around with these synthesizers and making new sounds and new music today. People whose musical language is FM synthesis. And it's just so cool, and it has the potential to be anything in the right hands. So that's FM synthesis in a nutshell. Any questions?
Is it still like blah, 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 blah?
Yep.
Is that distributed now? Like, are there any new things that you can buy that have the FM synthesis chip in them?
You can absolutely still buy keyboards with FM synthesis chips. There are newer keyboards with FM synthesis chips. Yeah, it's very much a thing that musicians and hobbyists are using today still.
Cool.
So absolutely. All right, I think I know where I want us to get to today. There's a good point before we review all the things, which is probably a good place to pick up next time, so we don't have to rehash everything. But just a couple key concepts before we move into these last couple of games before we wrap it up. So we're going to talk about pulse waves and samples. Okay, so pulse waves are still just square waves, but pulse waves are often what they would call the voice when it had been manipulated. Pulse waves are simply when it's become more rectangular or when they've changed the shape. They're changing the pulse of the wave. It goes from more like a sine wave where it's totally consistent to some kind of adaptation. And again, when you change it, just like Wendy Carlos did, it changes the color, the timbre, and that's really, really important. And then samples, very relevant today still. Sampling is as a thing, sampling as an artistic tool or device is used a lot in hip hop and other genres, for example, where they refer to a sample usually as like a pre-recorded piece of music from another song that they then take and rearrange artistically into their new work. Sampling really is just a pre-recorded sound. It could be an instrument, it can be a voice, it can be anything. And samples, the sky's the limit. Again, sampling, Hans Zimmer uses sampling to create what sounds like a real orchestra that he has complete control over, because the Vienna Sound Library is a good example. So they took an orchestra in Vienna, and each member of the orchestra recorded themselves on their instrument playing a variety of notes and timbres and other things. And they take all of that together, and then they attach that they make sound files out of all of that. And then when I push F on my keyboard, for example, it wires through this sampling library, and it's that person playing the F on their violin. So that sampling has all kinds of uses that are still very much relevant today. And this becomes key. It's already been in use. It becomes a pretty big part of this 5-channel NES sound chip. All right, so we're gonna get to these next couple of things here really, really quick, and that's where we're probably gonna end. So NES comes out with this 5-channel board. 5 channels sounds like it's way better than the other systems that were already in place, even though the FM synthesis chip had 8 channels. 5 channels, at least compared to other video game systems like the SID chip, sounds better. I don't know of anybody who feels that way in terms of the Nintendo system being better than the SID chip. It just has more channels, but these channels are limited. They have a single wave. And so the analogy I want to give here really quickly is if you think of each of those channels as the member of a band. So I'm calling this the NES band, right? 5 channels. You've got the one that looks like like 2 different sizes of rectangle. So 2 of those channels were pulse waves. One of those channels is a triangle wave. One of those channels is a noise channel, and then one of those channels is for sampling. All right, so when you put it all together, the way they would typically use those is the triangle wave was almost always used as like a bass instrument. You couldn't really like change the volume of it or whatever. It was just a really simple, plucky sort of bass sound. The noise wave is used a lot for sound effects. It's used, like you hear that like noise, like when you hear it in a game, it'll be obvious now that that's the noise wave, but they use it for percussion. The pulse waves could be used for all kinds of different sounds. I have them attached to guitars here because of the timbre variety of different guitars, but it really could be anything. And then the sample channel could also be anything. The problem in early games is you were limited by file size. So like the amount of data that we're streaming back and forth between each other right now, speaking in terms of how big those files are, is astronomically huge compared to the amount of file size they could fit like on a cartridge or in the game itself. So each one of the sampled sounds were very, very limited because they were so heavily compressed. And we'll talk more about that as we go. So the game that we have to introduce this to or with is Mario Brothers. Again, with this NES 5-channel sound chip with the music by Koji Kondo, who is just a person that I idolize as an artist, and just hit after hit and catchy tune after catchy tune, just a complete rock star in the video game composition world, and really in the composition world in general, especially when you consider this little compressed electronic band is what he had to work with. So a few things to listen to. I'm going to play you some of this. I'm going to play you the first level. Actually, to be honest, this walkthrough, sorry, Pack Attack 04082, he's really kind of bad at the game, so it kind of hurts me to watch it because he skips a bunch of stuff. That being said, and maybe he just wanted to like run through the game faster than I'm a person who wants to do every single thing while I'm playing a game, and he's not like that, so it kind of drives me crazy to watch this. But I want you to listen for the pulse waves. I want you to listen for the bass sound. Right, and that's the triangle wave. Listen for the percussion, right? That's the noise. And then listen for maybe a little bit of sampling. It's not used a ton in this early version of the game. Mario Brothers 3 uses it a bunch. Like the sampling part of this technology had to be developed. And again, by the time the NES was going out of style, the file size was so limited that they needed new technology, which they get soon. But okay, you got your assignment there. You're listening for these different parts. You two listeners, listen for the NES band. And remember, whenever a sound effect happens, one of those 5 channels has to stop what it's doing and make the sound effect. So that's like having your drum player in the background. Like what if the lead singer fell down, he had to play a sound effect to go with the lead singer falling off the stage or something like that. Like there's one of those channels has to just do that. So here we go. Super Mario Brothers. Level 1. All right. Could you hear it? Could you hear the distinct voices?
I heard them all. I don't know if I can distinguish them all from each other.
It's really hard, right? And
Yeah.
it's all happening so
Yeah.
fast. But so you've got that
Yeah.
main melody, right? The dun,
Yeah.
dun, 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 and then you've got like one voice giving it harmony. And those two
Yeah.
voices are kind of going the whole time. Then you've got that bass sound, the boom, 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 boom on the triangle wave, right?
Yep.
And most the noise track. Yeah, exactly. The noise track is making the drums. If you notice, there are these brief little moments where that one goes out. Because quite often the noise track, and I, as a kid, when I would do that, it just felt like the audio. I remember noticing the music, the character of the music changing as we were going, and I was like, I always thought we were blowing out the speakers or something, or like one voice was coming in more prominent than the other. No, it's shutting off because it has to be used for the sound effect for a second. Right.
Huh.
And that kind of thing might switch
Interesting.
channels. But for the most
Yeah.
part, those two voices that are playing the melody, the voice that's the bass and stuff, those are going for the most of the time, except for little moments where it's shutting off. Isn't that cool? And in real time, it just kind of floats by. And these
It all
songs
sounds
are
like one thing.
iconic, right? This
Oh,
one,
yeah.
this one. So we got the main theme, famous sound,
Yep.
and then
Koji Kondo.
mostly just that bass sound. So now you've freed up other channels. And this one for a second. Anyway, this is just brilliant. It's just brilliant use
So
of
cool.
limited tools. It's so
Yeah.
darn cool. All right, we got to keep moving here because we're running out of time. Anyway, there's I'll have so many videos and articles in the show notes if you really want to dig into this. There's some people who have broken down games like Castlevania, which has Castlevania, I think it's Castlevania 3 that has the score that's just phenomenal, and how they're switching between those 5 different channels so seamlessly. I have to get to really explore sampling, we have to talk about the Amiga, which is basically originally the Commodore system that was released in the United States, as best that I can understand. So the 64 was mostly in Europe, and the Amiga was here. Did you ever play on the Commodore Amiga?
I don't think so.
So the Commodore Amiga, just like with the SID chip being so groundbreaking, this 4-channel stereo sampler is one that, again, audio purists and like early music sampling purists still use a ton. So all 4 of these channels are samples. If you remember, that's pre-recorded stuff. And as you're going to see this pattern, as file size gets bigger and bigger, it really makes more sense to stop relying on the electronics in the system itself and just pre-record music, which is why today we can have full-on orchestral scores. They're just recording orchestras. Or at least, like even if they're using digital instruments, they're just recording those and sampling them, right? So much easier than doing all this other stuff. But again, the purists would love to go back to this. But the Amiga itself, basically, when you're using samples, you can do just about anything. And what they start to explore with the Amiga, again, still in use today, the Amiga itself ends up being used as a recording studio itself. Maybe not studio is the wrong thing. There's a whole series of software that is designed to help people actually compose music into the Amiga itself, and it's one of the early computers that does that. But this opens up, from a sound perspective, an almost endless array of possibilities. And not just that, we have these 4 channels that can behave however you want them to behave, and you can also set them up in this sort of stereo array. So you have a left sound and a right sound, which means you can mix between left and right and do all those kinds of cool stereo surround sound sounding things. And so IK Plus is the game that I wanted to show off here. International Karate Plus. It's kind of a Street Fighter style game, and you'll see this leap forward in audio. Music by David Lowe. Here you go. Dang.
Yeah, good.
I love that when they're on the ground and he's doing that, yeah.
Little move, right? Yeah.
It seems like they're missing a few animations here and there, maybe. But but the music's sure cool.
That's about how I fight.
That's how I get beat up. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
if I were to fight in this situation. Now you'll
That's the
notice
sound I
there when that guy fell, it sounded like a human voice going, right?
Yeah.
Because it probably was, right? Now you can actually record compressed human sounds. They might be simple. Ghostbusters, famously, the Nintendo game, for example, you can hear someone say Ghostbusters, but it barely sounds like a human voice because it's so heavily compressed. But I remember when we played that game with my friends, it was like, oh my gosh, a human said a thing, you know? Because you could sample, and in the Amiga, it's upped the amount you can sample. I'm going to let someone else in this presentation, probably in part 2, explain a little bit more about what the Amiga could do. But obviously, the sound options are different. Right?
So when you sample something, do you still have to play it on the chip?
Yes, absolutely. So, and you can, once I've played in a sound, for example, it can still be manipulated as well. So like I might record my voice saying something, but then I can take my voice and attach it to a keyboard. And then, for example, if I play a major chord, I could have my voice now tuned to those different notes that I'm playing, and it sounds like I'm through an electronic device singing a major chord, right? So they're recording in sounds as sort of an initial raw medium and then manipulating those sounds. They're moving them around. And the software would
see.
So if I put in a specific kind of flute-like sampled sound, I then want to be able to control when and what it plays and for how long, right? And how loud and how soft.
So whereas before they would just create the sounds right on the card,
yes,
and then it would come out for the game, now you have an extra level in between where you can record the sounds onto the computer, mess with them, and then play them out on the chip.
That's right. And there's pluses and minuses to all of that in terms of sampled versus non-sampled. Some of them come from some serious limitations or strengths of a video card. For example, some cards can't do that. Some computers can't do that. Not everyone has the same level of computer. So some computers, if they're not designed for these larger file sizes and better sound cards that we're going to get to in a minute, can't do the sampling. So you have to decide as a creator, am I going to try to like do some really bad quality sound sampling, or do I still continue to use some of these waveforms, in particular FM synthesis, which gives me a whole wide array of options that can be adapted to the technology that person has in their PC. When I'm doing it into a console, I know exactly what I'm getting myself into. It's all wired into the console itself. And this stays true to today. If I'm doing that to someone with a PC, then I'm really at the mercy of the build that they have for their PC. Again, also still a problem and an opportunity today. And we're going to see how I remember as a gamer, we'll talk about this in a second, like having to pick the lowest common denominator audio setting. So my experience of a game was very different than someone who had one of the better sound cards who could do way more than mine. Which is the next thing that we're going to talk about really quickly. I think this is probably the last thing that we're going to get to today, is now the advent of actual PC sound cards. So this is really taking FM synthesis to its peak, I would say, in terms of how it's used in sound cards. Because today it's all sampling, basically. This chip, this YM3812 chip, is the chip that is used forever and ever and ever for in game terms, like 10 years. The initial card that it's put in is called an. Did you ever play a game where you had to pick which audio setup you needed to use, like which cards you had?
Yeah, I think I did.
And the ones that you almost always had to choose from were like General MIDI, which was like the one, and that General MIDI, we're talking like 1983 MIDI, not the one that's coming here in a second, which was bad. And most computers could do that very sort of simple rudimentary MIDI sound, and it wasn't very good. Then you had like AdLib, and then you had Sound Blaster. Now, AdLib and Sound Blaster are very similar, like Sound Blaster 16. AdLib is the first. It has this YM3812 chip in it. And then Sound Blaster has the same chip in it. It takes over the market, mainly because it adds sampling to it. It adds a form of sampling to it in 1992. But there are nine FM synthesis channels on these sound cards. So this first 1990, did you ever play Wing Commander? I'll play a little bit of this game for you, and I want to see if you did. I loved this game and hated that my computer could not play it. Like this game, I would go to the PX, to the electronics section, and find the computer that this was on and try to get there before anyone else got there, because inevitably some kid from my high school would show up around the same time and try to play because they would have Wing Commander on the computer, and even if it was for 10 minutes while my parents were shopping, I'd get every second of Wing Commander in that I could. I loved this game. And it's obviously inspired by like Star Wars. And actually there's an X-Wing game that comes out later. It's pretty close to the mechanics of Wing Commander. So this is the ad-lib system. No sampling, which is pretty much why Sound Blaster takes it over. Creative Sound Labs takes over with PCM added to it. But listen again. You've got 9 channels, all of which can do FM synthesis, which means you can you don't really have to have channels dedicated to music and sound effects. You can separate them all out, and every single one of those channels can be made to sound like whatever instrument you want. And they're going to sound like those instruments for the most part, right? Within the limitations of what your algorithm can do. Okay? So here's just a scene this is the scene when you've just gone through your debrief. You've like talked to a bunch of people in the space station. You've gotten ready for your mission, and they've just debriefed you as a pilot to who you're going to go out and who you're going to fight. Right? So this is a scene where you're blasting off to go fight these, I can't even remember who they are. It's aliens here. Oops. That was a... Okay, here we go. Rushing to the hangar. Oh, see these scenes! I just remember playing this game. I was so pumped. You're taking off. You're now out in space.
My honor is to obey.
Cutscenes and everything. And you're about to face your first battle. You can switch your weapons. You've got the laser cannon or these missiles. You're cycling through your targets. Oh, music changes. They spotted you. And here comes your little laser cannons.
Sweet.
Those like crazy, like oval looking ships.
Whoa.
Even the sounds of them hitting, like that splash noise of the laser cannons hitting their target. Look how much damage you've done to your... Oh, got it.
Nice.
So anyway,
so many sounds,
right? As I think the problem is they get so sophisticated with sounds, and yet they're all still so similar because they're all still using the same sort of basic setup with FM synthesis. It's all electronic waves. Now listening to it, it's like, whoa, it's kind of hard to discern what was going on. Like then it was this immersive and crazy, incredible experience. Now it's like, man, it's all very similar sounds, kind of assaulting your ears at the same time. Right? You never played Wing Commander?
I think I might have played it a couple of times, but I think my friend had it.
Oh.
I played at his house maybe, but then I would always die really fast, and so then it was his turn. And then
yeah, back in the days when it wasn't cool to watch people play games. Now everybody does that, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, such a great game. I almost don't. Again, I don't want to play it because it was such a prominent part of my like early teen years that I think I'd be so disappointed in it now, but I just loved that game. Okay, then we move to the Sound Blaster 16. So here's the key part, and I put this game in there just for you because
SimCity 2000.
SimCity 2000, one of your favorites, and this one, I want you to listen for the sampling. So you're going to hear music that sounds similar to what we just heard in Wing Commander. This one has a lot less sound. This is willing to be silent, and because they can't, we don't like nowadays. You play SimCity and there's wind and birds chirping and other stuff, and this time you couldn't do that. You could have if you had enough space in your sampled channel, but it's really only one, and you're not gonna get enough space to do that kind of stuff. So you're going to quote unquote hear a decent amount of silence. But then what was fun about this is as I was watching this playthrough, first of all, I want you to listen to it and see if you can hear what I hear when it comes to the sampling part, and we're going to talk about it in a second.
Okay.
So here we go. This is a little bit of SimCity 2000.
Whoa. Nostalgia.
Okay, wait, I got to back up just a little bit because I want you to hear a little bit of the music. These aren't all starting where I set them to start, which bums me out a little bit. Here we go. So you're setting your different zones, right? There's supposed to be some music here in a second. There we go.
Residential.
Sure music. Okay, he's setting up these power plants. Listen for the sampling. Here, so he's dragging out the lines, the power lines.
Sound like a person.
Yes! But it sounds like you! To me, it sounds like you're going zzz. I was like, did he love this game because he did the zzz sound effects? Like, it's definitely a person going zzz.
Yeah, it is.
But I think it sounds like you. Anyway, I could not stop laughing when I heard that the first time. Like, Swift made a game. That's why I love SimCity 2000, or at least we need Swift. Like, there's a sound we're looking for this for the power plant lines, the power lines. We need it to be Swift. Anyway, so your zzz sound has been immortalized into SimCity
Thank
2000.
Goodness.
Maybe
that's my talent. That's my skill. It's the mark I'm going to leave on the world.
Yeah, see? This doesn't sound the same. Come on. Oh man. Oh gee whiz. All right. And so this is actually a good game to, I think, wrap up the discussion. Did you ever play Simon the Sorcerer?
No.
This game is gorgeous. Like, in terms of pixel art, this game is beautiful, and it's so fun to play. If you were ever into like Sierra games and stuff like this, it plays very similar to those old school games. But the cool thing here is, and why this works for this Sound Blaster game, is there's a lot of dialogue. And it's usually just one person talking at a time because of the limitations. And it's usually Simon the Sorcerer saying funny things. But the game looks beautiful, and again, I want you to listen for the amount of audio going on. It's like composers were like, I have all these channels, and I can do all these things. And sound designers were like, I have all these channels, and they load them up with probably way too much information. And part of that is probably because they can't really do ambient sound, which is what you would normally fill it with now, because silence is a little strange in a game by now. But anyway, here's an example using the Sound Blaster 16 sound card. It was designed for that, of maybe, I don't want to say the peak of that, because it still is very much used for a long time. And I always was jealous of my friends who had the Sound Blaster, the creative Sound Blaster card, because I could never get audio quality like this. Like, when I played a game like this, there was no dialogue. It was just the music, and it was subtitles. All right, so that's how they tweaked the way, similar to like in the early days of sound and film in the 1920s. Like, those first movies come out with dialogue, but not every theater could play them, so they would have subtitles. They would still have sound cards, right? So that transition is always tricky. And my computer, when I played this, the graphics were CGA, not VGA and so I didn't have near this many colors, and I did not have the sound that this is. So this is peak Simon the Sorcerer. Here we go. Oh, it's starting in the wrong spot. You do all this work to find the right spot? Okay, here we go. So again, the pixel art in this game, I think, is just gorgeous.
Yeah.
So you have a dog in the attic. You can hear it actually bark and creaking.
This homework is really bugging me. I think I'll find the dog and put it in the dryer again.
in his room. Simon in his room walks out.
So that's where you are. What's this? Ye olde spell bookie. What a load of old rubbish.
Is it though? Spellbook opens a portal. So what happens when a portal gets opened up in your attic from a spellbook?
The dog
Your
goes
dog goes
through.
through it.
Classic dog.
Which means you have to go through it.
Okay, guys.
Then you got these 4 goblin-looking dudes.
I thought I heard something.
Look at that art.
That is
Just the way the paper moves, the way the weather changes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Sound effects coming. And then Simon the Sorcerer falls out of the sky.
Hi, how do you do? Left side!
All right, we'll stop there. Anyway, I don't know. So you say that you never played Simon the
Beautiful.
Sorcerer?
I think I might have watched my friend play it over his shoulder.
It's so cool. And then the colors and the graphics and like peak pixel art. Musically speaking, music's by Adam Gilmour and Mark McLeod is just a really fun, upbeat score, really comedic. Again, very much like those Sierra games, in terms of their sort of flavor and atmosphere, adventure, but fun. So this is, I think, a great place to wrap this up because I've got this summary video by the 8-Bit guy where he goes through and basically catches us up in a really sort of concise, awesome way, and then moves us into the next phase of growth. So not just that, I think this is peak sound card, and now we're going to be moving into sampling and pushing us into the world of sound that is now. So,
Interesting.
man, even though we're only halfway through, I feel like I talked way too fast. Any questions, thoughts, anything that strikes you here in the beginning?
Well, it just goes back to what you always say, which is that when you give artists tools, it expands. For a little while, they just do the same thing that they did before, but then they all of a sudden realize, wait, I have twice as many channels as I had before. I can sample. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
To see them get these new tools and then be able to experiment with things and try out new ways of combining things. And
yeah, and just that creativity. One of the things that I thought about just in terms of quality control as a creator, speaking of growing up in Europe, like a movie would get released and I'd watch it with my cousins. And Jurassic Park, I think about that. We'd watch Jurassic Park, and it's using this new DTS sound. It's like CD sound. Like the projector had to have this special setup where they were playing a disc synchronized to the sound because they had to be like no compression, perfect digital. You could hear the T-Rex walking in the theater next door. Like, it was just this incredibly immersive, wonderful experience. And then go back to Germany, and we're watching it on base, and they're old auditoriums that haven't been renovated in years and years and years, with like a stereo speaker setup, and you can barely understand the dialogue. And all of a sudden, so much of the allure is gone. Like, these guys and the ability they had to allow the experience to adapt to your setup and still be so immersive and incredible. These pioneers of video game just creation. Like, you'll find a lot of times the designers of the video games are also the composers of the music. So this variety of skills, this interactivity, and just wait to see where it goes to. There's places like it's taking this immersive experience that movies are, and then allowing you to interact and really exist and live in that space. That's where we're headed. And wait until you listen to some of that stuff. And you have to make sure you do it on headphones for the next episode, because it's just mind-blowing. So anyway, I think that's kind of where we can wrap it up for now, unless you have any questions.
No, just something else that stuck out to me was what we should come back to is that immersion is contextual. So something could be immersive a long time ago that now wouldn't be immersive, but it's still 100% immersive back then.
Like Wing
So
Commander. Yeah, Wing Commander's experience now would be way different than it just seems so
awe and
real. Oh yes, I felt awe playing Wing Commander.
yeah,
And coming across that video filled me with that previous sense of awe, and then there's a little bit of awe. Like, oh man, it's kind of like my memory of this was so much different. Like watching some of those pixel art games, my imagination filled in so many gaps.
yeah,
Like, and that's where I got my sense of awe, was in the interaction of my imagination in the game. My imagination does not have to work as hard anymore.
yeah.
And that's not to, I don't know if that's meant to say, I mean, what people are creating nowadays is just stunning and outstanding. But I guess that's why it's fun to see my kids going back and playing these pixel art games, you know, like that's such a thing again. And so, you know, I think that does still have a place, that fill in of our imagination. So I think we gotta do another one of these next week, and then hold off on our other plans for 2 weeks from now. What do you think?
Sweet. Sounds good.
Okay, so
wait. Sounds good.
Hey, I see what you did there. What's up?
I've been holding that one in the whole episode.
Well, I'm gonna have to I was so excited. I genuinely all day today was so excited to share some of this. I hope that came through. Please tell me what.
No, it's awesome.
Please tell me what I got wrong. I'm sure there's lots that I got wrong. There's so many things that I'm guessing you, listener, if you've been playing games for the amount of time that I've been playing them for or longer, you're gonna think of games and technologies that I'm skipping over, and I'd love to hear about those too. There are so many episodes that we could take one of these technologies, like the SID card, and do a whole series of episodes on the music that was created from those. I mean, there's just so much to mine here. The objective is to start with an overview and then go from there. This is a rich, artistic, incredible world of video game music, from Space Invaders to all the way to Wing Commander and Mario Brothers and all. It's just incredible, and it's only gonna blow your mind even more as we move forward. So guys, thank you for joining us today. Be sure you leave a comment. Let me know when you think audio and games, what's the first game that comes to your mind? Is there a melody or a song that catches that, like, you cannot get out of your head? A video game melody or song? I'd love to know about that. What games did we miss? What mistakes did I make? Like, subscribe, follow us on what platforms are we on? Instagram and Discord. All those links are in the show notes. And just please,
we also have a Twitter/X,
whatever that thing is, Twitter X.
Yeah.
Please join us in those places. Look at the show notes for those, and mostly just go play some games and listen this time when you play.
Yeah, for once.
Once, these darn kids these days.
Gamers.
Bye, everybody.